in Spiritual Savannah. Okay, God. Welcome to everybody watching on YouTube. We're here with the Wednesday class that shall not be named. We have our international guest, wonderful supporter now back. David is back in England, so he's international. We've got me in Savannah. We've got Eva, Jeff, Karen, Arlene, and Flossie, and the hand of possibly Ron, all joining us here. I know we have a couple people already on YouTube, including Arnold, who's in Illinois. So we got 3 states and 2 countries. And if
3 states.
Illinois, Savannah,
South Carolina. Oh, no, we don't have Georgia. Never mind, Georgia.
and
Well,
if
you're Georgia.
I need to call Noel, I emailed her about it. If we have Texas, then we'll have, if we have Texas, then we'll have 3 states and 3 countries, which would be great.
Rabbi, you're in Georgia, right?
Yeah. Well, if we have Georgia, South Carolina, and Illinois, that's 3 states, and then England,
Right.
America, and Texas, that's 3 countries. So it's pretty nice. All right.
Right.
So today we're going to continue our discussion on women in the Bible, which is a great discussion. We're going to look at today not minor characters, but characters who don't have, I guess they're considered minor characters. They don't have a lot of airspace, but really important ones, for better or worse. And I think we have to remember that women are mentioned throughout the Bible, but they often are not the main characters. And even when they are the main characters, they're often secondary to the men. We're going to talk about some women, though, today who have very small parts, but very significant parts. Some are known, some are not known. Some are good, and some are pure evil. So we will talk about the most evil of all the people in the Bible who are women, or one of the 2, but this one is much worse than Delilah. We're not going to talk about Delilah because I think we all know who Delilah is. Yeah, we listen to talk radio, we listen to the radio, so we know Delilah. So Delilah, it's the goddess of love. So what we're going to talk about today is a couple of them, and the first one we're going to talk about is Rahab, who is, if you have not heard of her, she is the famous harlot of Jericho. Now, what does it mean to be a harlot? In this case, we're not sure. She's called a Zona, which we know means that. But we also know that she is a very important woman. So harlot could also mean in this case a woman who runs an inn, because apparently inns and prostitution were connected. You could do both. She is a righteous woman, and we have a lot of issues with her because she does a really wonderful thing, but she's considered a harlot. So it's one of 2 cases where harlots have a good name, and there's a balance between trying to figure out how could this person be so good when she did something like this. So let's talk about who she is. After the Israelites leave Egypt, we're in the desert for 40 years. Moses dies at the end of Deuteronomy. And then we go to the book of Joshua, and they enter into the land of Israel, or Canaan. So Joshua brings them in. So they go up, come through what would be now the West Bank, into the first city, which is Jericho. And we know the story about Jericho, but we're going to talk about the story that happens before the walls come tumbling down, which is part of the song in The Music Man. Just heard that recently. So he sends a couple spies to check out this walled city. And somehow it is known to the king that there's a possibility that spies will be sent, or that they have already been sent. And they end up in the house of Rahab, which is probably an inn, or maybe just her house, but she's a harlot. And she helps the spies get out of the city, even though she knows that it could be a death sentence, that the king is looking for these people. Somehow she knows, and she knows what's going on in the world, because as we see, she's informed as to what the Israelites are doing, that these Israelites are coming. She has a fear of their power, of God. And so she helps them get to the roof and then helps get them out of the city. And, they basically go down a rope. And what she does ask, they ask, what we can do for you? She says, will you spare my family when you take the city? And the spies agree. And Joshua upholds this agreement given by the spies. And when the city of Jericho falls, they rescue her family, and we'll talk about what happens to them in a second. So I don't know if you've ever heard of her, but there is some little known issue with her because of the miracle of the wall. So there's a miracle of the wall that's never discussed. What does that mean? What is the miracle of the wall? Well, when they go to her house, she lives in a house on the wall. And the spies tell her, when the Israelites are going to take the city, make sure your family are in your house so you'll be saved. What happens to the wall?
Comes tumbling down.
Comes tumbling down. Where is Rahab and her family? In the wall. So somehow their house in the wall magically stays up while the whole wall falls around. So just imagine a house with nothing under it magically staying in air. And then after the wall falls down, somehow they use a rope and they all climb down to this house that is in midair, magically just sitting there. So that is obviously never discussed, but in the Bible, but it is the magic of the house, because it literally says it's in the wall, and we know the wall later falls down. So I think that's just a funny thing. So she is considered righteous because she saves these spies. Obviously, she doesn't destroy the city, but she gives them information. And there's not much else said about her except that she's saved. Now, what we know also is you have the Bible and you have rabbinic literature, the rabbis who go later and discuss these stories and bring in midrash stories, or what they say law as they describe. Rahab is considered a very righteous woman. There's a very significant amount written about her later by the rabbis. So even though she has a very small part in the story of Joshua, later on discussed at length. One, she is considered the most beautiful woman in the world by some. So beautiful that, so beautiful. I'm sorry, she's the most beautiful woman in the world, you're supposed to say?
How beautiful.
Thank you, Flossie. Everybody else failed that. How beautiful. She is so beautiful that the mere mention of her name gets us excited, gets men excited. The mere mention of her name, even generations later, when nobody actually sees her, that's how beautiful she is. There is, as I mentioned, a lot of problems with the designation she's given, Zona, which we know what it means. So that is one of the reasons that word, some say that word can also mean landlady, woman who sells food, because giving this kind of demarcation to a harlot as the most beautiful woman and a righteous woman is very, very, very difficult. Others say that she was not only a harlot, she was like, what's the famous one in LA? She was the famous woman of the night. all the famous clients, and I don't know.
Heidi Fleiss.
Heidi Fleiss, thank you. Or Heidi Klum. Heidi Fleiss?
Heidi
Wow.
Fleiss.
Heidi Fleiss. Anyway, that's who she is. So they say she was so popular that there wasn't an important man in the city who she had not slept with. She was so beautiful that these men, when they slept with her, what did they do? They revealed a lot of information that was private, need to know. And so she shared that information about the city, about the stuff going on around the city, all the armies, what they had, with the spies. And so that is another very popular story about her, is that later she marries none other than Joshua. She married Joshua, who is, of course, we have no record in the Bible of Joshua getting married or having kids, but we don't have a record of him specifically saying he never married and had kids. So she married him. So she is a pious convert, very similar to Ruth. And so that is another way of bringing her into the fold, that she saved these spies. She got information. She ended up having the magic wall, and she becomes a convert to Judaism, because already early on it said she believed in the God Most High, or that she understood God. So she does see that this army is coming and that they have a powerful God. And so this is who she is. So when we talk about Rahab, there's a lot of debates over her, but she is also very much a pious woman, and is really, in the Judaism and the rabbis, there's often more than not, it's black and white. You're good or you're bad. And she is good. She is a mensch. She is a hero. She is the progenitor of many generations of Jews, as the wife of none other than Joshua, a major figure. How do we know he's a major figure? Because if you have a book named after you, you're probably a major figure, and he is. So this is Rahab, known as the harlot, or the innkeeper, or the woman who sells food, who may or may not been a harlot according to the rabbis, but according to the Bible, most likely is. But again, there were different types of harlots. There were the ones at the temple, so we know was part of Judaism. There were probably the regal ones like her. There were different ones, and we'll talk about somebody else. Any questions about Rahab? And again, it's a very small section she has. My favorite part is the magic wall, because you can read this a dozen, 100 times, and you don't make that connection that she lives in the wall, and then the wall is destroyed because you just don't think about it until your professor says, how's the wall standing? So most likely the wall fell, except for a section where she was in the house, because she wasn't on the bottom, because they needed rope, they need to go up, and then they needed rope later. So that is Rahab. And of course, a famous woman. And we will talk about another woman who does something similar, but I'm going to read you what she said to the spies so that you understand who she was. This is the second chapter of Joshua. I know that the Eternal has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Eternal dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Eternal your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Eternal that you will show kindness to my family, because I've shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and you will save us from death. So this woman, who's named one of the most beautiful women of all time, is very informed. She understands the power of God. She knows about these Israelites escaping Egypt, about defeating the Amorites. How could someone be so knowledgeable? They didn't have newspapers. You know, this is not Egypt. This is a Canaanite. So obviously she had some sort of source of information. So that's Rahab. In case you're wondering, who are the other women who are considered the most beautiful women of all time? According to one of the Midrash and also the Talmud, Sarah, Abigail, Esther, and Rahab. So we'll talk about, we've already talked about Abigail, we've already talked about Esther. We'll probably talk about Sarah at another time because she's also a major character. And we'll talk about Abigail in a moment. If you're wondering who the descendants are, obviously it doesn't say in the text because it doesn't say in the text that she married Joshua. This is speculation later. The descendants are Jeremiah, which is, of course, a major descendant. Hilkiah, Sariah, Maaseiah, Baruch, all considered prophets. And, of course, she is considered the ancestor of Huldah, who is one of the female prophets we mentioned, one of 3 women designated a prophet. So none of this is found in the Torah, by the way, or the Bible. This all comes later in rabbinic literature. So it's not necessarily meant to be true, but just a way of explaining how important she was. Any questions about Rahab, who's a wonderfully interesting story person in the book of Joshua, 2nd chapter, so right after Moses died. We're going to talk about another person who has a very similar story in terms of length. It is a minor character who has one of the most interesting stories. We talked about her before when we talked about witchcraft, but I thought I'd bring her up again because she's a famous woman. And as Rahab is not an Israelite yet, this woman is not an Israelite either. And she is, of course, given really no name. Her moniker is the Witch of Endor, which we talked about as such a great story. For those of us who are Star Wars fans, did any of you know, if any of you saw Return of the Jedi, where they had the cute little teddy bears, the Ewoks, that helped them defeat the army? That planet where the final battle in Return of the Jedi, the one where they defeat the Emperor and Darth Vader is redeemed. Does anybody know the name of that planet? It is Endor. So that is probably where George Lucas got this name, from the Witch of Endor. So what happens with the story of the Witch of Endor? Now, Saul is king. He's the first king. And things went well for a while, but they're not going well now. The Philistines have gathered their forces. They're about to meet Saul. He sees they have a large number. He's called out to God. God has said nothing to him because Samuel has already told him that he is not the future king and God's not going to talk to him anymore. So what does he do? He goes to the Witch of Endor. Now, it's very important to understand that Saul is the person who has forbade witchcraft and sent his soldiers to go out and kill people who are doing it. So he goes and finds this very famous Witch of Endor, and he goes and he pretends that he is just there. You know, he doesn't go as the king. He goes as just a traveler. And he kind of tries to trick her into giving him a reading, because everybody knows that he has forbade this, and it would seem like it's going to be a trick. If Saul went and said, "I want to see the Witch of Endor, I am the king of the Israelites," they would say, "Absolutely not. I'm not a witch. That's a mistake. I haven't heard anything," because she knows he's trying to kill people. So She knows who he is right away. She refuses to comply with him. I'm not a witch. I don't know where you heard this. You're trying to trick me. And he allays her fears and says, no, you're not in trouble. I'll pay you. I want you to do something for me. And what does he want her to do? He wants her to raise from the dead Samuel, who was the man who made him king, but also the man who said, you're not going to be king, kind of his mentor, the great leader. And so Saul prostrates himself as she raises Saul from the dead. And what does Saul do? Saul pleads, oh my gosh, I'm in so much danger. God has forsaken me. What am I supposed to do? And what does Samuel say? He says, very wisely, why are you bothering me? I'm dead. Basically, that's what he says. He's like, buck up and go do your thing. I'm dead. I've already told you what's going to happen. Why did you raise me from the dead? I'm not giving you anything. See you later. So Saul, who's now exhausted, he's probably been fasting. He can't sleep. And, he's so exhausted that the witch basically has to feed him so he doesn't die right there and faint. He will, of course, soon be killed by the Philistines, and David will certainly become. So this woman, don't know her name, completely anonymous. We just know her as the Witch of Endor and probably the Queen of the Ewoks. That's a joke because those are the teddy bears from Star Wars, not Queen of the Ewoks. Anybody takes it seriously, I apologize. You're not Star Wars aficionados. And if you were Star Wars people, you would be laughing hysterically. But so there are other issues with this. There's serious issues with this because what does she do? She raises the dead. That is powerful mojo. That's super fun. Not only does she raise the dead, she raises Samuel from the death of wherever he's been. This is a powerful. Now, witchcraft is a very difficult concept because how can you do witchcraft if God controls everything? And how can God, no human being has the power to bring back the dead, but yet she did it. So there's so many discussions. Many would say she didn't actually do it. She tricked him. And even though Samuel and Saul had a conversation that seemed like it was Samuel, everybody knew who Samuel was. And so it was easy to trick Saul because this was not like a minor character. Anybody could fake being the most famous person of all time at a minimal level. Perhaps everybody knew that Samuel had told Saul he wasn't going to be king. So others would say, yes, she was able to do it, but because of God, not because of her, because God wanted it to happen. And that's an important thing that the rabbis have to make sure because witchcraft is illegal. Some say it can't be done, and yet it is done here. So it must have been God who did it because only God could do it. Now, others would say, I'm sorry, Flossie.
Where did witchcraft come in here as far as Judaism? It just seems so strange.
It does, except for witchcraft at this time has become illegal. Anybody practicing it's witchcraft, and again, sometimes what the Jews do seems like witchcraft. Moses throws the staff down and becomes a snake. Hail from heavens. Witchcraft is basically something not coming from the power of God or considered outside, even though everything's from God, or not sanctioned by God, or not sanctioned by Judaism. And there's a fine line between what is allowed and what isn't. This obviously is not. Otherwise, Saul would not be hiding who he is and sneaking around. But there is a lot of instances of witchcraft in some ways. This is by far the most famous because she is literally named the Witch of Endor. But we see episodes of incantations by the Israelites that are sanctioned. And then we see some that are not sanctioned. We see a prophet like Balaam, who is a prophet, though he's not Jewish. So we see a non-Jewish prophet who has some sort of prophetic vision, and we see that he has actual ones because God speaks through him. The donkey talks to him. So it's really interesting, and there's books and essays throughout the years on witchcraft. We talked about a lot of it. This is the most famous instance of all of them because obviously she is labeled a witch, so it makes it very obvious. So what we also see is it's very easy not to take this story literal. This is some sort of satire. We got the king who uses a non-Jewish witch to bring back Samuel, and Samuel basically says, "Why are you bothering me? I am dead." Or Saul is going mad, and this is in his mind because he is going mad. He's been seeing ghosts and having a lot of problems. So there's a lot of different ways to look at this. And one is that she didn't do it. She tricked him, which some rabbis do. Others, like the very famous Saadia Gaon, one of the most important rabbis of all time, says she was able to do it because God wanted her to do it. And she didn't actually have powers because nobody does, but God gave this last moment to Saul. Others, again, look at it as just some sort of story, a satire about this man who is going so desperate, and the great fall of Saul, who was never really meant to be a great king. He's going insane. He's seeking out a witch after he has already made witchcraft illegal. So there's a lot of irony here. That's why it's satire. He's made witchcraft illegal, and he's now going to have the most famous meeting with a witch in the entire Bible. So is it truth? Is it an allegory or satire? It could be any of it. It's again one of those things because there's so little of it. All we know also is that she gives him food. She's not killed. We don't know what happens to her. There are debates as to what happens to her later. But it's a very short story about this woman. And it creates a lot of debate for so many reasons. Any thoughts or questions?
I was just Googling her, and there's a lot of paintings.
Oh, yeah. There's a
I'm
lot of everything.
surprised. Yeah,
I mean, let's face it. We are not unusual in that we love the idea of witchcraft. We've got Harry Potter. We've got the Lord of the Rings. We may think that we're the first age to really enjoy werewolf movies, but that is not true because we have these stories going back thousands of years about zombies and werewolves and witchcraft and dragons and vampires. It's fun. We love it. That's why Grimm's fairy tales are so fun. They're very scary, but we tell them to our little kids. And so witchcraft there's a lot of discussion on it because it is fun.
Rabbi, what reminds me as you're telling the story is the Greek Oracle of Delphi.
Very similar.
And are they contemporaneous? I was trying to figure that out, but
we don't know exactly when these stories, this one. So it could be. I'll have to look up when the Oracle of Delphi was.
Well, I'm looking it up right now.
Right.
Yeah.
So this story, if you're talking about when it happened, we're talking 1200s, early 1100s BCE.
Okay.
But I don't know where the Oracle, but now when is it written? It is written probably in the 10th or 9th centuries BCE, so a couple of 100 years later, or even later.
Sorry, this says it between the 8th and 4th century. This is Delphi. The Oracle. Somewhere in the height of her fame was between the 8th and 4th centuries BCE.
Well, this one was written probably anywhere from written down in the 10th century to the 6th century. So it could have been, I can
So
look at
older.
it exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it also could be contemporary with it.
Yeah, I just wondered.
Obviously, the Greeks were much more famous in terms of their literature, so certainly it could be. I have to look that up. That's right. We should look that up if there's anybody has done some sort of study on it. So let's go to another story that has some similarities to Rahab, but a lot of differences. This is a story from the actual Torah. This is from Genesis, and it's the story of Tamar. So who is Tamar? You may or may not have heard of her. She is the daughter-in-law of Judah. Now, who is Judah? Judah is one of the 12 sons of Jacob. Judah will become the most prominent or the leader of the 12 sons. We know Joseph is the grand vizier of Egypt, so he's very powerful, but Judah will become the head of the family. How do we know Judah will become the head of the family? What are we called today?
Jews. Yeah.
Jews, which comes from
Judaism.
Judah. Judah, the tribe will be the most powerful. That'll be the tribe of King David. The name of the country will be Judah. When we go into exile, we will call ourselves eventually Jews. So Judah is the most powerful in terms of the family. Yet he starts out as a rogue. He's one of the ones who sells his brother to slavery. And is he one of the ones who killed the people who raped his sister? Was that him? Yeah, I think it was him. So he's kind of a rogue. And as time goes on, we see the evolution where he goes from this rogue, not the greatest person in the world, to a great leader. And one of the last stories of him being not a great person concerns Tamar. So Tamar he has 3 sons. And Tamar is married to the eldest son, Er, E-R, who is killed by God because he's wicked. Now we know about the Levirate marriage. What happens if a man is killed and has no children? His brother has the obligation of marrying
The wife.
the wife. And so Tamar marries his brother Onan. And then, of course, her first son will be considered Er's son. However, Onan does something he's not supposed to do. He may have committed adultery. We don't know. But he also dies. And so now Tamar is going to be given to his youngest son, Shelah, when he's of age. However, Judah now thinks that Tamar is bad luck, or there's something wrong with her. So he says, you are betrothed to my son, but when his son becomes of age, he does not let her marry him. So this puts Tamar in a very tenuous position because she's engaged but not married. I mean, she can't get married, she can't have children, she can't, working, and there's all these issues now. She's in the ether, she's trapped. And this is one of the things the modern world has tried to protect women from, is this type of difficulty. So she's trapped, she's in nowhere land. The rest of her life, she is going to have to be a betrothed woman who's never married. It is a very difficult position. No children. She is literally part of Judah's family, but is not part of the family, but she's not part of her family either. She's nowhere. I mean, she's basically a non-entity. So she hears that Judah has his wife die, and that he's going to the temple. And so she decides to, not the temple, she's going to go, sorry, the temple wasn't existing here. She's going to go to, one of the places where you can sacrifice. And she disguises herself as a kind of a sanctuary harlot. When you go into the big cities to do sacrifice and stuff, you go to the brothels. This is one of the legal brothels. And so he sleeps with her. And she charges a goat. But he doesn't have a goat. So he says, here's my seal, here's my staff and a cord, and I'm gonna go get this, I'll leave that with you. And then tomorrow I'll get you a goat. So he wakes up and she's gone, and she's taken the 3 things with her. Later, a few months later, he finds out that his daughter-in-law is pregnant. Now, when I say daughter-in-law, I'm saying it sarcastically. She still literally is his daughter-in-law, even though she's not his daughter-in-law. And so what does he do? Because remember, he's prone to anger. He's more of not a horrible person, but he's not a good person. He says, well, I hear my daughter-in-law. He doesn't say, let's kill her. He says, let's burn her to death. I mean, that's a horrific way to die. I mean, stoning is probably better than this.
I think so.
And there's no trial. He doesn't want to find out if she was raped, or maybe she's gotten sort of married. Who knows, which probably has not happened. But he's like, we're going to burn this woman now. And then he goes and she sends him the staff, the seal, and the cord. And now he realizes that, guess what? What she did is kind of legal, because his wife has died. He was married to her sons or death. This is almost a levirate marriage. It's not with a sibling, but it's with the father. So we don't know what the rules were for this, because there's not that many examples. We know the rule is a sibling. From the book of Ruth, we find that if there's no sibling, it can be another relative, so it ends up being Boaz. And from this, we find out it can also be possibly the dad. And so now he marries her, obviously, and she will have twins, Perez and Zerah. And of course, from the book of Ruth, coincidentally enough, we find out that Perez will be the ancestor of King David. So from this strange relationship, and from the relationship between a convert, Ruth, and Boaz, because Boaz is a descendant, we will have King David. So this is a sanctioned bit of harlotry, because it's not really harlotry, because she's literally part of his family, and his wife has died. So for all we know, and it doesn't say it, when he had sex with her, that could have constituted marriage, because they didn't have marriage ceremonies all the time. I mean, we see an example with Jacob, but we don't see any other marriage. So consummation could be considered marriage. We've seen Jacob being tricked by his father-in-law into marrying Leah instead of Rachel. That's a precedent that is only one generation before this. Now we see the opposite, the man being tricked by the actual woman. And so obviously she was wearing a veil, and she may have had, other things done to her face. So it is legitimized here, meaning that women who are considered to have lack of power are allowed to use trickery to make sure they get their way if it's what God wants. Rahab is tricking the king of her kingdom into saving these people. Leah and Rachel are, although not part of it, but they are being used. Here it's actually the woman who does the tricking, and it's legitimized by the Torah, no less. So, and it's really legitimized because of the birth of Perez. And so what we see is feminine wiles are used because they don't have power otherwise. That's one of the reasons in the modern world we're trying to change these things, empower women so they don't have to do this sort of trickery. Any thoughts or questions? All right. Wow, I'm answering all of them. I don't know if you've heard of Tamar, but it is a side story. This is the last story of Judah not being a good person. After this, he will then become the leader of the family and save his youngest brother and prove, and that is why, obviously. Now, when you have these stories, they're essential for developing characters. And Judah, even though Judah has done some things he shouldn't, there has to be a way to make him become this leader that he should become. So let's go to the daughters of Zlochad. This one you may have heard of. It's another story from the Torah.
Daughters of what, Rabbi?
One more time. Zelofchad.
Zolokon?
Zelofchad. Zelopchad. I don't know how that, there's different ways to spell it. It's a very difficult name. It's in the portion known as Pinchas. It's in the book of Numbers towards the end. And it's a really important story because this is the most important story that deals with the rights of women and in the Torah. So what happens is there are 5 daughters, and this is the time of Moses when he is giving out the allotments of land when they go into the land of Israel. So it's the end of his reign, as he's going to be dying soon. He's telling everybody the property rights and they're going to get property. And of course, property can go through the men only. And so these 5 daughters, Mala, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah, go to Moses and basically say, listen, our dad had no sons. We need rights. And it's really interesting because on many levels. Number one, these 5 women don't go up to Moses begging and saying, please let us, we need something to survive. These 5 women go to Moses and say, our father was a good man. He had the chance to rebel because he probably was friends with, and he said, no, I'm not rebelling against Moses. He's been dedicated to you. He's dead. He didn't have sons. You are going to give us our land. It is a very direct. It's not a please. They don't use the please, please, please language. They use the you are going to do this language. So much so that Moses doesn't know what to do. He is flummoxed by these women. So unlike us, he has a really impressive, he has we all may have advisors. His advisor is just more impressive because who's his advisor? God is his advisor. Mm-hmm. So he goes to his conciliary, which is God, and says, I don't know what to do. These women just came up to me. They're very, very, what's the word? Forward. Most of the time, if you're going to Moses, people are probably asking very politely. He's an older man now. He's been the leader. He's the greatest person in Jewish history. And although these women are not impolite, they are not, they're very direct. I'll just say that. So this is where we get the rules, because God says to Moses, they're telling you the right thing. Do what they say. And so he has to create a new law that basically says, if a father does not have sons, the women inherit the land. Now, when they get married, the land will go to their husbands, but it stays within their family, which is very important because we can understand that if I'm a woman, I don't have male siblings, I could lose everything. I mean, what if I'm not married yet and my father dies and it all goes back to the tribe because there's no men? And it also speaks a little bit about if I have a brother and there's 5 women and the brother gets everything, it's basically a beware what you do to your sisters because they have God's approval. So me being the brother with 5 sisters, it's kind of also a make sure to do what you're supposed to do. And we know guys don't always do it, and they still won't, but it's kind of the Torah saying, make sure to take care of the women, which is way ahead of its time. We often chastise in the Reform and the liberal world the Bible being male-centric, but the world was male-centric, and the rest of the world was not creating these laws to protect women as we were. So definitely we were ahead of the time back then. We're not always ahead of the time, but certainly in this period we are, because we're creating rules for women who don't have power, but rules like you have to treat them with respect. There are all these rules about the rights of women, what they're required. And here we see this. Now, what's really great is these women who are going to Moses are holy women who are knowledgeable. We know about the census. We know about the rights of men. We know our father did what he was supposed to. We know the laws, and we want you to change the laws for us. So these are smart women who understand the system and understand the laws of inheritance and understand the problems with the law of inheritance. And they're bringing it to Moses to say there are holes in this law. Let's fix it. And he does. Now, there is a problem that comes later at the very end, the last portion of Numbers, with this law, because men find a hole in this law, but specifically the leaders of the tribe. Now, it's not a bad thing, this hole, because at this time it's a very tribal society. Jeff has his tribe and they have their land. David has his tribe and their land. Paul has their tribe. We all have our tribes in our land. And when the men marry, of course, the land stays within the tribe. Now, what happens is, what if I die with no men and I leave my land to my daughters? And then Jeff from another tribe marries one of my daughters. That means legally, Jeff's tribe now owns part of my tribe, which is a big problem because that can create havoc between the tribes, and it would mean property issues. So the addendum to this law is, for these 5 daughters, if you have to, in order to keep the land, you have to marry somebody from your tribe. You can marry somebody from another tribe. That's okay, because that happens all the time. But if you do, you give up your right to the land. It'll probably revert to either the tribe or to one of your sisters or somebody else. So that is an addendum. It's to keep the tribes from warring with each other, basically, because we know what will happen. So it's not very good for women, but this rule is not created to subjugate women. It just happens to do it, but it's created to keep the tribes together and to people to be able to keep the land together. So that is the addendum that happens at the end. Any thoughts on the Zelophehad? And I think it's really, really amazing, not that the law, but the way they go to Moses. These are strong women who know what's going on and know there is a problem, and they're not going to, what's the movie Network? What is it? I'm upset and I'm not going to take it anymore. What's the phrase that won him the Academy Award?
I'm not going to
Mad
take
as
it.
hell.
Yeah, mad as hell.
Mad as hell.
Hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. This is what they go to Moses doing.
Huh.
They're probably not as
Interesting.
crazy in the way they say it, but that's what they're saying. And he accepts what they're saying. And they go to Moses, and the most powerful man in our history, and he's flummoxed. He's like, let me go talk to God. He's basically making excuse for he can't answer this question. So it's really a hilarious story if you see it from that perspective. This powerful man is completely flummoxed by 5 very young, well, they're not, they're young women, but he's like, he's 120 and they're like probably 16-year-old, 15, 14, and 17-year-old women. I mean, they're kids to him. So I think it's a great story. So the last one we're going to talk about, a minor character, although it's funny because her name becomes so popular in Judaism, is Abigail. And Abigail's a pretty popular name in Judaism throughout and throughout history, but also beyond Judaism. And it's based on a woman who has a very small part, but does something very important. And this is Abigail. And first, of course, famously known as one of David's wives, one of the ones he really loved. But the story is very simple. She is married to one of the tribal leaders of the Canaanite tribes. And David is being chased by Saul. So he's basically kind of like a mafia boss. He's got a powerful army. He's not king. He's thwarting the king. He goes and you better, it's like the Godfather. He sends the guys to pick up the money from the stores because what are they doing? They're paying him protection. It's a protection racket. So he goes to this king Nabal. He sends and says, you need to send us our money or else we're going to come in and kill everybody. We're going to take over and kill people. And Nabal is like not an idiot. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not paying you. And his wife realizes this is a problem because David's going to come and kill everybody. And my husband is an idiot, doesn't realize that David's not really charging that much. You got to give him some sheep. That's it. Or this is what you do. You pay the Godfather. And so she goes to David and basically convinces him not to kill his people. She is eloquent. She prostrates herself. She says basically some beautiful words. Don't cause us grief because of one man. The usual, kind of really gives an empowered speech. We'll pay this. And so she saves her people basically. And it's probably a very small group of people. It's not like a powerful tribe. Otherwise, they would be able to stand up to David because he's not the king yet. So she pays him off basically and begs not, look, here's the stuff. Don't kill our tribe. Now, David agrees and says, fine, no worries. But she goes back and her husband finds out. And he is not happy. He is really upset, but it doesn't really matter because basically he has a heart attack. He dies mysteriously in that moment. God has him die. And then Abigail marries David. David's like, oh, he died? Great. I'm going to marry this woman. She was awesome. She's smart, beautiful. I like what she... So he becomes his third wife or second wife. And one of the ones he really likes, he didn't really get along with he didn't get along with the daughter of Saul, but he really likes his wife and she becomes one of his, most dedicated supporters. We don't hear a lot about her later, but as soon as it's like, David hears, wait a minute, Nabal just died. I got to go, before it's too late. What's he doing? He hears the first second he hears, he sends a messenger, says, I'd like to marry her. Make sure she knows I want to be first in line. And so he marries her, maybe for her wealth, who knows? But really, in this case, he marries her, and I think I remember I think she came with donkeys, so we didn't get a lot from her. But he got something, and so she becomes his wife. And now what's really interesting about this story is that it is similar in some ways to Tamar and to other women. But what does not happen here is there's nothing illicit about this except for she's not telling her husband she's spending money. There's no sex here. There's no affair. It's the opposite of what happens with Bathsheba. David doesn't do anything, he's not in love with this woman. He doesn't try and marry her behind and kill the husband. He acquiesces and says, I'm not going to kill people, which is the opposite of what happens with Bathsheba, where he goes and basically has her husband killed. So at this point, David is really a pretty good guy. I mean, he's doing miraculous things. And so he says, wait, this is an intelligent woman. I mean, I would love to marry this woman. So it's really more, doesn't describe her as the most beautiful woman in the world like Rahab. I mean, just, he likes her. He's got, he's like, wow, she's smart. She's got a great personality. I'm going to marry her. And that's what happens. And so he becomes a wife who actually, wherever he goes, she often goes with him. So she's one of the favored wives. The last one, I'll mention one more. We have a little bit more time. And the last one is the most famous evil woman outside of probably Eve and Delilah. Eve and Delilah are often portrayed in negative tones. As we know, Eve is not negative. That is used later to limit women's rights. She wasn't really evil. Delilah, is Delilah evil? In a way, she is. She obviously is paid to find the weakness of Samson, so she's not the greatest person. She could be even construed as evil, but there's one woman who is legitimately labeled evil, and that woman is Jezebel. So much so today that the name Jezebel is not given to daughters anymore. Jezebel is not a popular name, and it has never been a popular name since this Bible came out, because she is labeled evil in the text, and this is a ruthless woman. She is the wife of Ahab, who was one of the kings of Israel. Remember, at this time period, there are two kingdoms of Israel: the north Israel, the south Judah. The south is always run by a descendant of David. The north is run by a king for a generation or two, a family, and then somebody comes in, kills them, and takes over. It's a series of kings. So she is the wife of Ahab during the time of Elijah. So it is a time where you have one of the major prophets going around telling people the king and queen are bad. They should be better human beings, because she worships Baal. She is very ruthless. She sends her prophets to kill him. When she finds out her prophets are killed, she sends people to kill Elijah and threatens her and sends people after her. Her husband Ahab is not a great king, probably. He's more of a military king. So she's running more she seems like she's basically running. She's never labeled the queen. Maybe what's it called when you're the queen mother, when the son is too young to run, you're the queen. Like if the king's dead and the prince is 6 years old, he becomes king at 6, but the mother is really running it. But there's a word.
I think it's regent. I think it's a regent.
Queen regent. Yeah, she's the regent basically in some ways, but not legally because her husband's still alive. But there's another word for it, but I can't. Regent's perfect. And so she's the schemer. And it comes famously when her husband wants to buy some land that's next to where they're living, but the land is owned by somebody named Naboth, but this is ancestral land. So he is not able to touch it because it's ancestral land, the guy. And so what does she do? She says, don't worry, I'll take care of it. She bribes a couple people to say this man is evil. He's been speaking against the king. He's inciting treason, has him killed, and then all of a sudden the land is now reverts to the state. So she is an evil woman who is very, very much akin to pure evil in many ways. And her name obviously has become, at the best, Jezebel is somebody who is considered a backstabber or someone who is a harlot. But at worst, it's considered an evil person. She's not a harlot. She is just a bad person. And so what happens is she picks a fight with Elijah, who is, you may have heard of him. He's a pretty important prophet, probably the most important prophet that doesn't have a book named after him, save for Moses, because he doesn't write his stuff down. It's written later. So And Elijah then prophesizes that she's going to die. And not only is she going to die, but guess what's going to happen to her carcass? It's going to be eaten by dogs. And sure enough, her husband and sons are killed by Jehu, who is the person who overthrows her husband, and kills her children. And so he comes in and she knows she's going to be killed. And so basically her servants and her dedicated staff probably don't want to be killed with her and know what kind of person she is. So they throw her off a ledge into dogs and she's eaten by the dogs. And so, it basically, exactly. So she's a Baal supporter. She's a foreign princess, which is another reason. Whereas people like Rahab come to know God, and Ruth and Tamar, Tamar is actually Jewish. She stays a Baal worshiper. She stays a foreign princess. She stays an evil woman. And it is a very sad story. Now, what we have to also understand is there is probably more to the story. Again, it has to do with women. What does it tell us about one of the few women who are ruling? This may be the only time we see a woman ruling Israelite society in any way. And what kind of job is she doing? A bad one. This is a woman who is unfit to rule, some might say, because she is a woman. And if we ever allow a woman to rule, or if a husband is too weak or lenient, this is what's going to happen. And so that could be one of the reasons that she is demonized. But again, that's for us to believe. So basically, if you're Jezebel, you're a harlot, but really today you're considered more of a harlot, but really Jezebel is somebody who's just a horrible person. But and so that's all we have for today. We'll do one more week of women next week. Flossie?
If you're saying about all these women, bad influence and here bad rule, was it many years before Golda Meir, a woman, became the head of Israel?
Well, again, this is a biblical time period, so it's many years before. So Golda Meir is a shining example of the Jewish world putting a woman in charge. And it's a rare case in history. Not as rare today, but back then, as we mentioned, there were only two women who were leaders of, democracies or heads of state. Indira Gandhi, Golda Meir, and Margaret Thatcher, kind of the first three. Whether you like them or not, that was impressive that women could go to this position. And even today in America, we've had a woman run for president. We had a woman run for president for a third party. We had a woman run for president for a major party. We have a woman vice president. So we've definitely moved in different directions. We're not going to have a woman president. I think today, if a woman ran for president, people would be more concerned with what party she is, what's her stance on certain things, and there would be a small portion that would not vote for her as a woman. But quite frankly, is that what happened to Hillary Clinton? I think some people didn't vote for her as a woman, but I think a lot of people didn't vote for her because they didn't want a Democrat or they didn't like her, which is great. I'd rather you not vote for a woman because you think she'll be a bad president than not vote for her because she'll be a woman president. So,
But just reminder, she got 3
won the popular
million
votes.
more votes.
Yeah, she won the popular
than her
vote.
opponent.
Did she lose
whichever
because she was a
it was.
woman? It was such a close election that it certainly could be true that she lost because she was a woman. But I think she lost more because her party didn't win and she didn't go to Wisconsin. But I pray that when Barack Obama was elected president, if you didn't vote for Barack Obama, I think hopefully 90% who didn't vote for him was because they did not like him, didn't like his policies. I want to vote Republican, which is great. And a small percent, hopefully a small percentage didn't vote for him because of the color of his skin. Hopefully we're getting to that place in the world, but we'll see. But in this case, again, it can be construed very overtly that a woman should not be allowed to rule. And again, the Bible is ahead of its time, but not so ahead of its time like today. So, but that may just be reading into it. That certainly could be a way of reading into it from our modern sensibilities. At the time, it may have not had played a part at all, that because she's a woman, she shouldn't rule. It may have been more of a, because she was a Baal worshiper trying to kill Elijah.
And we have found that you can use the Bible to prove anything if you look in the right places.
That's exactly right. And unfortunately, you can use it for things that are not supposed to be used by it. Right? Exactly. So this next week, I think if anybody has any particular women, but let me know, I was thinking we'd go over the more famous women and do like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, do the famous matriarchs, if that's okay. Because we've kind of done some
Sounds good.
less famous.
Sure.
And I mean, we'll be familiar with their stories, but we'll try and add a few things to it as well.
Great.
So as for what's coming up, if you have not signed up for Second Night Seder, please call right away because it may be booked and we may just have 1 or 2 spaces left for you guys. So please call in. First night is completely booked. We have the Women's Seder coming up. There are places available for that. That's coming up it's this Sunday. It should be amazing. It's not really a Women's Seder per se. It's going to be more of and Rachel, Cantor Rachel and Jamie and all these people. So it should be really amazing. More amazing because I'm going, but I'm not doing anything. So that means it'll probably be successful. For you guys, there's plenty of room for the Men's Seder, which will be on the 21st, right? A week from this Sunday. Am I wrong? I thought it was a week.
Oh, I thought it was a Saturday. I thought it was a Saturday.
That's right, Saturday night, the 20th, the Saturday night, right?
I remember thinking that was a strange time.
And that is just going to be a lot of fun. It's very we're going to have meat. We're going to have lots of mezcal, type of tequila. We'll have some fun. It's always a great time. So please sign up. That's always a big party. And then, of course, we'll have the Seders. The second night will be on the 23rd. We will have services on the 23rd, and Yizkor services will be on the 29th. And so, but we all have plenty of things coming up. I'm going to give one other thing in case you're interested. On the 18th, there's going to be a lecture on Kugels and Collards through the Historic Savannah Foundation. I'm one of the people speaking, hopefully about Kugel because I do not like collards. And it's called People, Places, and Stories That Define Savannah. It's going to be at the Historic Savannah Foundation's headquarters, and it's at 5:30 as like hors d'oeuvres, and it's 6, so you can probably get there and drive back still during sunlight. And then one other thing that's really interesting coming up, a lot of Thursdays on the 25th, the Mighty Eighth is having a wonderful program about a POW during World War II who protected Jews. And the son of the POW wrote a book about it. He'll be speaking. Both those events are free. Any questions? And that'll be at the Mighty Eighth.
Rabbi, I wanted to ask you, I sent you something last night. There was something I saw on Facebook, and I can't remember whose it was, about the most beautiful synagogues in the world.
Right, and I just put it up on Facebook.
And we were one of them. We were the only one in the United States.
And I just put that up on Facebook.
Good. Good.
So we had seen the article before. There was was it the Instagram thing where you saw it's a thing where it goes through the pictures of the 15 synagogues, and we're the only one. And you're right, that's perfect.
Yeah, and some like Prague and Budapest.
I know, it's really cool.
It was very cool to see us on there. So,
all right, okay. So yes, we are the best. Just putting it out there.
We are. Yeah.
But I hope everybody's doing well. Happy upcoming Passover. Let us know if you need anything, and we'll see everybody next week on the Wednesday class that shall not be named, as we talked about Sarah, Rachel, Rebecca, and Leah. Although, should we do something more Passover-y? I'm trying to think. We've already done Miriam. No, we'll do those. We'll just keep that. All right. Stay safe, everybody.
Great. Thank you, Rabbi.